introduction to the introduction, and that is that where are we in the Torah? Where are we in the plot? So as you mentioned last week, the plot, I guess the plot of this, not much plot left to talk about, because we're talking about, we're at the end of toward the end of the 40 years. The Jewish people are already at the bank of the Jordan River, east of the Jordan. So they're not moving anywhere from this point. Remember that we're the third to last portion of the fourth book. Next week, we're going to read the last two portions because there's two portions combined. And the fifth book is just repetition, primarily repetition. And there's really no plot in the fifth book until the last day of Moshe's life. So there's really one day of plot. So in some sense, the Torah, we're very close to the end of the Torah, very close to the end of the Torah. There's going to be a little bit more plot next week where you have 2.5 tribes want to settle in the lands that the Jewish people conquered east of the Jordan. Okay, so we have a little bit of plot, but we already conquered those lands. And here, this week, like I said, we're stationary, we're in one place. Of course, events happen, but we're in one place. Why am I telling this to you? Because a lot of this parsha, at least if you look from one perspective, is really what it's really about is about transition. It's really about transition from Moshe's lifetime and from Moshe's leadership to what's going to follow in the future. Maybe a different form of leadership, maybe Joshua, maybe certainly a big transition. We had no leader like Moses, so it's certainly a big transition. And while it looks like the parsha may have just sort of a series of events, but if you keep that in mind, that we're toward the end, and it's a story of transition from Moshe to what would come after Moshe, then you may see that we may get deeper insight into what's going on here. So this is just putting it out there to keep your eyes and ears open for these connections between the various aspects of the parsha. So we'll read the nutshell, and then we'll see what we can get to. Okay, nutshell of Pinchas. Aaron's grandson Pinchas is rewarded for his act of zealotry in killing the Simonite prince Zimri and the Midianite princess, who was his paramour. God grants him a covenant, peace, and priesthood. So that was sort of the end. It's a continuation to the end of last week's parsha. Maybe we can elaborate upon this in a few moments. A census of the people counts 601,730 men between the ages of 20 and 60. Moses is instructed on how the land is to be divided by lottery among the tribes and families of Israel. The 5 daughters of Tzlafchad petitioned Moses that they be granted the portion of the land belonging to their father, who died without sons. God accepts their claim and incorporates it into the Torah's laws of inheritance. Torah's laws of inheritance at that point were that the inheritance goes to the sons. If there are no sons, it goes to the father. If father is not alive, it goes to the brothers. And if the brothers are not alive, it goes to the father's brothers, et cetera, et cetera. What is changes in this week's parsha is that if there are no sons, it goes to the daughters. So daughters precede any other relatives other than sons. Okay. Moses empowers Joshua to succeed him and lead the people into the land of Israel. Also, very interesting story if you look at the details, how Moshe's successor is appointed. The parsha concludes with a detailed list of the daily offerings and the additional offerings brought on Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, which is the first of the month, and the festivals of Passover, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeret. So the conclusion from the fifth reading of the parsha is all about the offerings, which is surprising because you would expect the offerings to be in the fourth book, in the third book, the book of Leviticus, where you talk about the temple and the priests and purity and impurity. It's a little bit of a surprise to find it in the fifth book, in the fourth book, the book of Numbers, but that's another story. That's the conclusion of the nutshell. Now, of course, the question is where to begin. Where to begin from? Okay, so let's take 2-3 minutes to talk about the story of Pinchas, because he gets the name of the parsha. So I guess we have to talk about him. I don't necessarily want to think about the story per se, because that story is a complicated story, a difficult story. We sat here an hour yesterday on the story. I don't think we made a lot of progress, but it's a difficult story. I want to look at one aspect of the story. But to do that, we have to turn back to last week's parsha, and that's where the Torah gives us the history of the actual story. This parsha is the response to the story. So the story is that the people go astray after the daughters of Moab and after the idols of Moab, because the women get the people to serve the idols. So that's if you look at Numbers chapter 25, verse 1 and 2, Israel settled in Shittim, and the people began to commit harlotry with the daughters of the Moabites. They invited the people to sacrifice to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and prostrated themselves to their gods. Israel became attached to Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord flared against Israel. That's the story. Lord tells Moses, take all the leaders of the people and hang them before the Lord facing the sun, and then the flaring anger of the Lord will be removed from Israel. In other words, it means take the leaders of the people and hang them. Who's them? Hang the leaders of Israel? No. Rashi says it means take the leaders of the people should take the people who worship idols, and they should kill them, because idol worship is a capital offense. Okay. Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you shall kill the men who become attached to Baal Peor. Okay. Now here comes a story with Zimri and Pinchas. Even though we don't know his name is Zimri yet, we find that out this week, but here we go. Then an Israelite man came and brought the Midianite woman to his brethren before the eyes of Moses and before the eyes of the entire congregation of the children of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So a man comes, he brings the Midianite woman in front of Moshe, in front of the congregation of Israel, and everybody is crying. What is happening here? We're missing some information. The story continues, and we're going to go back to the Rashi here. But the story continues. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, son of Aaron the Kohen, saw this, arose from the congregation, took a spear in his hands. He went after the Israelite man into the chamber and drove it through both of them, the Israelite man and the woman through her stomach, and the plague ceased from the children of Israel. So he kills these two people. And God thinks it's a wonderful idea, and that's why this week he gets priesthood, and he gets the blessing of peace. Okay. We will still try to focus on the facts here before we get to the commentary. At least the facts, the way Rashi records them. Says Rashi. So Rashi says in verse 6, Israelite man came and brought the Midianite woman to his brethren before the eyes of Moses and before the eyes of the entire congregation. So let's read. Then an Israelite man came, says Rashi. Rashi is quoting it from the Talmud, Sanhedrin. The tribe of Shimon gathered around Zimri, who was their prince, and they said to him, we have been sentenced to death, yet you sit here and remain silent, as it is related in chapter of Eluhain ha-Nisrafin, Sanhedrin chapter, page 82. In other words, we know that the people that followed Baal Peor were primarily the tribe of Shimon. We see it later in the census, because a lot of people died from Shimon. In any case, they come to the leader and say, we're being killed, you have to step in, that's your job as a leader. So Zimri has to take a stand. So what does he do? He takes a Midianite woman, Cosbi, the daughter of Tzur, as we'll see later, before the eyes of Moses. They said to him, Moses, is this forbidden? Is this one forbidden, or is she permitted? If you say it is forbidden, who permitted for you the daughter of Jethro? As it is stated there in Sanhedrin. Again, Rashi keeps telling you want the full story, go to Sanhedrin. What do they say? Zimri comes with a Midianite woman, an idol worshiper. And he says, can I have relations with her? If you say no, then how could you marry your wife? which is Tzipporah, who was a Midianite woman. Now, of course, there's a big difference, but this is populism, so we don't want to get into the details. So no one is looking for the truth. While they were weeping, everybody was weeping. Why were they weeping? So here, again, Rashi quotes the Medrash. It says as follows. I'm going to first read, and then we see if it requires explanation. The law that anyone cohabiting with a non-Jewish woman is to be executed by zealots eluded him. There is a law that if somebody publicly cohabits with doesn't say a non-Jewish woman, it says Aramit, an idol worshiper. So then zealots may execute him. That's the law. This eluded Moshe. Therefore, they all burst out weeping. Now Rashi comments, at the incident of the golden calf, Moses successfully confronted 600,000. As it says, he grounded until it was powder. Moshe grounded the golden calf. Yet here, he appeared so helpless. In other words, why is Moshe so helpless here? Moshe can't do anything. So Rashi's interpretation is, again, quoting the Medrash, however, this happened so that Pinchas should come and take what was due to him. Medrash Tanchuma. In other words, the wonder is, why is Moshe paralyzed? How come Moshe can't deal with the situation? And all Moshe can do is be paralyzed to the extent that all the people loyal to Moses, all they're doing is crying. So what's Rashi's answer? Rashi's answer is, well, it's that God, or it was orchestrated, that Moshe should not know what to do, so Pinchas could step in. Okay, we're keeping on to read. We'll see what happens. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, son of Aaron the Kohen, saw this, arose from the congregation. What did he see? Says Rashi, he saw the deed of Zimri and the Midianite woman and reminded himself of the law. He remembered the law. He said to Moses, I learned from you, if someone cohabits with an Aramean heathen woman, zealots have a right to strike him dead. He replied to him, Moshe says, this is a saying in Aramaic, let the one who reads the letter be the agent to carry it out. In other words, what do you want from me? If this is the law you remember, go ahead and take an action. Moshe cannot take an action. Moshe can't tell him what to do because Moshe is an involved party, as we alluded to. Immediately, he took a spear in his hand, and that's the story. Now, do I want to get into the story and say, is it a nice story? Is it a not nice story? Is it positive? Is it negative? I don't want to go into that story. But what I do want to say, and why this is the story of Pinchas, and I think that this really sets in motion all the following stories. This is a story of transition in the sense that probably for the first time, maybe is it the first time? Yeah, it's the first time that I can think of, or in other words, the first time that we can think of in the last 40 years that Moses is paralyzed. Other times he was upset, he complained to God. Here, Moses has nothing to say, okay? This is a transition. This is the first time an event like that happens. So Pinchas, whether or not we get into, we like what he did or we didn't like what he did, the reality is that according to the Torah, God says that it was that at least the act was an act of peace, and therefore he's rewarded for it. But without getting into that, Pinchas is operating for the first time in an area, in a morally difficult area, meaning to say in a space where there is no clear directive from Moshe. And he has to take the initiative and decide how he wants to act. And this is a first. We didn't have that up to this point. And the thesis here is, what I'm trying to say here is if you understand that this is the picture the Torah is painting. The Torah is setting up a situation where Moshe is not present the way he used to be for whatever reason. In that story, he wasn't present because he, like I said, he was an involved party. He can't rule about a situation that he's involved with because he himself was married to a Midianite woman. But what's important here is that Moshe himself is the one who is not operating, and other people have to step in. So I want to just keep that in mind, because that's going to help us understand what's happening later in the parsha. In the seemingly unrelated stories, no, but it's very related, because part of the problem here is, why do you start this portion with Pinchas? Why don't you put Pinchas, the first paragraph of this parsha, which is the reward for last week, why don't you group it into last week? So maybe it's in this week, because what we're trying to get at, we don't care for the story so much. What we're trying to get at here is, we say Moshe was for whatever reason paralyzed. Moshe couldn't operate. Someone else had to step in a situation where there was no clarity about what to do. Okay, that's the takeaway. And that helps us understand everything that's going to follow in the next parsha, in the next parsha. So forgive me if that's all I want to say about this. If anybody wants to insist that you want to talk further about Pinchas, that is, please make your opinion known, and I'll, against my better judgment, I'll take the bait. But if not, we want to continue, because I just wanted to get that perspective and see how that paints the rest of the parsha. But don't be shy, because if you want to discuss it further, then we should. Okay, now I want to continue. And show you what and highlight these points. What's the next major part of the story of the parsha? The next major part of the parsha is a census. Census starts at chapter 26, and the book of Leviticus starts at verse 1 of chapter 26, and we spend no less than 51 verses on the census. Why do you need another census? Well, it's the book of Numbers. So the book of Numbers is called the book of Numbers because it opens with the census. And then toward the end of the book, we have another census. That's this week's parsha. So we have the census. Why was there a census? Why do you need a census at this point? So it's 40 years later. So they didn't do a census every decade, but I guess they did one 39 years apart. So let's read the verse, and we'll read the Rashi, and you'll see there's two perspectives of why they did the census. I'm more interested in one of them. That's going to help our overarching idea here. So let's share the verse, and we'll read the Rashi. Says the verse as follows: It was after the plague. What plague? So the Torah over there earlier last week alluded to the story that when the people were sinning, there was a plague, and when Pinchas did his act, the plague ceased. So it was after the plague that the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, the Lord spoke to Moses and to Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, saying, at that point, Aaron has already passed away, and the high priest was his son Elazar. And God speaks to Aaron, to Moses and to Elazar, and he says as follows: take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel from 20 years old and upwards, following their fathers' houses, all that are fit to go out to war in Israel. So it's very interesting that we mentioned the Beit Avotan, the father's home. The family takes a very important role in the census, but we're not going to get into that right now. What we do want to say is that God tells Moshe and Elazar, time to take a census. Why a census? Rashi brings two interpretations. I want to focus on the second one, but we'll read the first one as well. It was after the plague. It's a very interesting, without getting into it too much here, it's a very interesting verse. It's an anomaly in the Torah. It may happen one other time, maybe two other times, where in the same verse, there is a paragraph break. So it says it was after the plague. If you look in the Hebrew, it was after the plague. And then there's a pei, which is a sign for ptucha. It's an open space in the middle of a verse. So in the sense that it's not so clear that the second clause of the verse is connected to the first clause of the verse. Why is it in the same verse? It's a good question. It's in the same verse, but it's in a different paragraph, just to make things complicated. So let's read Rashi. Rashi says like this: Why it was after the plague? In other words, the first interpretation is looking at the first clause and the second clause as related. It was after the plague, so Hashem says, take a census. Says Rashi, this can be compared to a shepherd whose flock was intruded by wolves who killed some of the sheep. He counted them to know how many were left. In other words, why is there a census now? The census is in response to the plague. Because there was a plague, some Jews died. So now we need a census to figure out how many Jews are left. Just like the shepherd, if the wolves come in and attack the flock, he's going to take a census after they get rid of the wolves to figure out how many are left. That's the first interpretation. First interpretation says, second clause of the verse, which is the commandment to take a census, is related to the first clause of the verse, which is the plague. Okay, next interpretation. Another interpretation, when they left Egypt and were entrusted to Moses, they were delivered to him with a number. Now that he was close to death and would soon have to return his flock, he returns them with a number. That's from the Medrash Tanchuma. What is the Medrash saying? This has nothing to do with the plague. It happened to be after the plague, so we say it was after the plague, just to place it in the context of when it happened. But there's a paragraph break between the first half of the verse and the second half of the verse to tell you that that according to the second interpretation, at least, the census has nothing to do with the plague. The census has everything to do with the fact that it's the end of Moshe's career. When Moshe got the people, when Moshe is a shepherd, right? Both metaphors, both interpretations use the metaphor of a shepherd. Moshe was a shepherd. So when the owner of the sheep, which is God, the owner of the Jewish people, entrusts the sheep to the shepherd, he says, here are your sheep, and this is the number. Now, when the shepherd is giving back the sheep, so to speak, to God, because his role as a leader is coming to a close, then Moshe says, okay, here's the number. You gave them to me with a number. I'm giving them back to you with a number. So in other words, the second interpretation says this whole census is really about the question of the whole census is about the end of Moshe's leadership. So we already have two stories. The first story is we see that for the first time, Moshe doesn't know what to do. Moshe cannot operate, either because he forgot the law or because he's an involved party. Moshe is not here. Moshe is not giving any insight, and Eliezer and Pinchas must take initiative. Whether or not we like what he did, that's not the point here. The point here is he is operating, he's making decisions for the first time where there's no clarity from Moses. The next story, again, emphasizes the end of Moshe's life. The census is really here to show that Moshe's career is coming to an end. Okay, after that, what's the next story? After that is the story of the daughters of Tzlafchad. Again, daughters of Tzlafchad, they come to Moshe and they say, okay, we want inherit our father's land. So what's interesting is, again, Moshe, this is one of the two stories of the Torah where Moshe does not know the law. In other words, the law doesn't come from God. In other words, the law is not initiated by God communicating to Moshe. The law is initiated by the people making a request. Okay, so again, you see, it's not the leadership model. It's not where the leader leads the people. It's the people's feedback to Moshe and to God, which generates this law. This happens twice in the Torah that I can remember. The other time is, anybody remember the other time? Also in the beginning of the fourth book. The other time is the second Passover. A few weeks ago, we read that the Jewish people, some people were impure, ritually impure. And when it came to the time to offer the Passover offering, they said, we want the opportunity to offer it. And they speak to God, speak to Moshe, speaks to God, and God says, okay, there's a second chance, the second Passover. And it's very interesting that in the language that the daughters of Tzlafchad employ, they employ a very similar language. They say, Lama Yigara, why should the name of our father be, why should my father's name be missing out? That's the same language that the people come to Moshe in the second Passover and they say, Lama Yigara, why should we lose out? Okay, what am I getting at? I'm getting at again. This is a story that does not emphasize the leadership of the leader, who usually, typically, 611 of the 613 commandments were communicated top down. This is a mitzvah that was introduced from the people themselves. In other words, there's no clear leadership. Okay, so we have already three stories that highlight that point. And then we get to the most interesting story, in other words, most related story is the story where Moshe, God tells Moshe, well, you can't go into Israel, go onto the mountain, and you should, you'll see the land of Israel, but you won't be able to cross over. Again, emphasizing the end of an era. And then we get to the portion where we talk about Moshe asks for a successor, which I want to focus on that. And so I think we'll stop there. We'll jump into this story. And right after this story is the sacrifices. And again, the thesis is going to be that the sacrifices also are related to the end of Moshe's life. So if this thesis is correct, we see that almost every single story in this parasha is highlighting or is a result of the fact that it's toward the end of Moshe's life. We are passing on from the Moshe's model of leadership to another form of leadership. And like I said, I think it's emphasized in all the stories. So a lot of what we did now is just laying out, sort of speaking generally. Maybe we should get more specific, but we'll start specifically with the story of Moshe asking God to appoint a leader and God's response. And we'll delve into that, and hopefully we can extract some information from there that would help us understand the general picture as well. So that's the roadmap for the next couple of minutes. Again, comments, questions, please don't hesitate to jump right in.
Rabbi,
yes.
Is there a possibility, has anybody suggested the possibility that Moshe could have been starting with his early dementia at that point in his life? Kind of, not to get political, but kind of, we see what kind of dementia, what dementia can do publicly when we see the affairs of state here.
Yes, so that is a very interesting point. It's hard to diagnose from a distance, but according to the Torah's perspective, the answer is no, and I'll show you how I know that. But well, you still have months and months. We're still a few months away from Moshe's passing. Over those months, Moshe is extremely articulate, and he speaks forcefully, and he relates, and he speaks to the people forcefully, and he speaks unbelievable poetry. So that would diminish the dementia argument. But I'll tell you something else. Let's look at the last final page of the Torah. Again, I have no idea, I wasn't there, but let's take what the Torah itself says. So let's look at the final page of the Torah. Says the Torah as follows. I'm going to share the screen, so you don't have to trust me. So this is the last page of the Torah, the last day of Moshe's life, describing Moshe's passing. So it's verse 5 of chapter 33. Verse 5. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab by the mouth of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley, in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. And no person knows the place of his burial unto this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye had not dimmed, nor had he lost his natural freshness. So this is the Torah trying to say that Moshe wasn't weak. He didn't die because he was weak. He died because that was the end of his mission on earth. And similarly, the sages say elsewhere, 3 portions before that, in Vayelech, the day of Moshe turns 120, he tells the people, I could no longer come in and go out, meaning I can no longer lead you. And Rashi says, maybe, why can't he no longer lead us? You may think because he was weak. Says Rashi, no, that cannot be the reason. Because Rashi quotes this verse that he says, let me show you the Rashi instead of just telling you by heart. Okay, so here's Vayelech. This is the day Moshe turns 120, which reminds me of a joke. It's not a nice joke, but I'll say it anyway. I heard it from, he's an elderly man. He lives in Jerusalem. He said, what do you wish somebody on their 120th birthday? And the answer is, have a good day. Okay, so let's read. Moshe tells the people as follows. He said to them, today I am 120 years old. I can no longer go or come. And the Lord said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. Says Rashi, Moses went and he tells the people, I can no longer go or come, meaning I can't lead you. Says Rashi, one might think this means that Moses' strength had ebbed, and that is why he could no longer go or come. Scripture, however, states regarding Moses, his eye had not dimmed, nor had he lost his natural moisture, that was the verse I read earlier, which teaches us that his powers were intact, even at the day of his passing. So what then is the meaning of I can no longer? Here it means I am not permitted, because authority was taken from him and granted to Joshua. When I say I can't, what does I can't mean? I can't could mean I have no strength, or I can't could mean I have no permission. So Rashi says on Moshe's 120th birthday, when he says, I can no longer lead you, it's not because he physically can't, but it's because it's not, his role is concluded. Now it's time for a new leader. And so I would say that a few months earlier, it's even more so when you see that Moshe is not able to operate. It's because, like Rashi quotes the Medrash that says that it was orchestrated this way so somebody else can step in, because there has to be a model. People have to realize that you can't always rely on Moses. So that's my answer. I don't know.
That's good. Thank you.
That's the best I can do. Okay. Now I want to look at the portion here where God tells Moshe, well, you're not going to be able to go into Israel. Well, he reiterates, he told that to him earlier again. And here, there is one of the times that God tells Moshe to climb the mountain and see the land of Israel. Now, he doesn't do it yet. He doesn't do it for a few months to the last day. But again, it's reiterated here. Why is it reiterated again is a good question, but we'll get to that. Maybe we'll get to that. So I'm looking at chapter 27, verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, go up to this Mount Avarim. What is Avarim? So it's a very interesting name because elsewhere in the last page of the Torah, the last day of Moshe's life, the Torah refers to it as Har Nevo, a different name. In this place, it's called Har HaAvarim. What's the mean different? Why the difference? So we once had a speaker here on years ago, and she spoke and she said that the word Avarim could mean Aver, the other side of the Jordan. So that's why it has the name, the mountain that's on the other side of the Jordan. But La'avor also means to pass over. So in other words, this could really mean this is the Mount of Transition. And that's not really the name, but that's what's happening here. God is saying, you can go, you can see the land, but you cannot continue the journey. Joshua is going to be the one who continues the journey. So if this is correct, and again, that fits in the overarching theme that this is a story of transition. Okay, so let's read the story. So he says, you're going to go, so climb the mountain. Right, verse 12, the Lord said to Moses, go up to this Mount Avarim and look at the land that I have given the children of Israel. And when you have seen it, you too will be gathered to your people, just as Aaron, your brother, was gathered. Because you disobeyed my commandment in the desert of Sin, when the congregation quarreled, when you were to sanctify me through the water before their eyes. These were the waters of dispute at Kadesh in the desert of Sin. We're not going to get into that story again. Okay, here is what Moses tells Hashem. Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation. Right? Legitimate. He's a leader. He's a responsible leader. A leader, part of the responsibility is to figure out who's going to succeed me. So he turns to God and he says, appoint someone over the congregation. Verse 16 is a beautiful verse. Now, verse 17 is a little bit strange. Why is it so strange? It's a beautiful verse in the sense that it's very poetic, but it's strange in the sense is why does Moshe have to tell this to God? Isn't that obvious, right? So verse 16, God tells Moshe tells God, appoint someone over the congregation. And 17, Moshe gives the job description, who will go forth before them and come before them, who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord will not be like a sheep without a shepherd. So, again, very poetic. It's redundant. It says, go forth before them, come before them, will lead them out and bring them in. I don't know what all these descriptions mean. We can talk about that later. But the point here is, we would be perfectly fine without verse 17, right? Verse 16 is God tells Moshe, appoint someone, a man over the congregation. What's the problem? Verse 17 is Moshe is telling God the credentials of the job. Or the requirements, I should say, requirements for the job, which is strange. Doesn't God know? Okay, let's continue. What happens then? The Lord said to Moses, take for yourself Joshua, the son of Nun, a man of spirit, and you shall lay your hand upon him. Which is a whole nother story. Rashi explains Moshe was a little bit disappointed. Moshe was hoping the successor would be his child. Instead, it was Joshua, who was his student, not his child. But in any case, in verse 18, God tells him to choose Joshua. Verse 19, and you shall present him before Elazar the Kohen and before the entire congregation, and you shall command him in their presence. You shall bestow some of your majesty upon him, so that all the congregation of the children of Israel will take heed. He shall stand before Elazar the Kohen and seek counsel from him through the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. By his word they shall go, and by his word they shall come. He and all Israel with him, and the entire congregation. Okay, very beautiful. And we know that Joshua was selected, and that's exactly what happens. Verse 22, Moses did as the Lord had commanded him, and he took Joshua and presented him before Elazar the Kohen and before the entire congregation. He laid his hands upon him and commanded him in accordance with what the Lord had spoken to Moses. Beautiful. Now we know Joshua is going to be the leader. We don't hear about him until the last day of Moshe's life, but that's another story. He's the leader. He's going to continue the mission. He's going to bring the people back to help cross the Jordan and take over and conquer the land of Israel. Oh, beautiful. Okay, what I'm about to say is accurate. Okay, good. Okay, now that we have everything called the foundation laid, let's think about let's look at an interesting question. Look at verse 17. And again, the question of 17 is, why do you have to say it? God tells Moshe, Moshe tells God, that the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation. That makes sense. The question was, why does Moshe have to continue and say what the job of the leader is? Go before them, come before them, who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord will not be a sheep without a shepherd. Why do I need verse 17? So one way to think about verse 17 is to say, did God agree to Moshe? Did God fulfill Moshe's request? Moshe asked for a leader. Did God fulfill that request? Now, it's a trick question, of course, because the simple answer is yes, but it's a trick question here. So it's a trick question because the thesis is no, God did not fulfill Moshe's request. Because all of verse 17, it's a very beautiful and very poetic verse, but that's not what God did. Now, what's verse 17? Verse 17, Moshe says, God, could you please appoint a man over the congregation? And what is verse 17? It's the requirements for the job. But who fits these requirements? Nobody fits these requirements as much as Moshe. Moshe led the people. He went in before them. He went out before them. And finally, the end, the congregation of the Lord will not be like a sheep without a shepherd. Just the imagery of a shepherd and sheep is Moshe, right? The first thing we hear about Moshe, the first time Moshe is introduced in the beginning of a second book of the Torah, I think it's chapter, I don't remember, 3 or 2, that's chapter 3. Moshe haya ro'eh. Moshe was a shepherd. And the commentary, the Medrash points out, because he was a shepherd and loyal to his sheep, that's why God selects him, and he's loyal to his people, and he does everything for his sheep, and he does everything for his people. Now comes the time, and Moshe is about to pass on, a few months away, but Moshe says, okay, we got to find a successor. So he tells God, here, I need to please appoint a person over the congregation. And this is what I want you to do. Appoint someone just like me. Appoint someone who will do everything for the people. Appoint someone who will lead them like a shepherd leads the sheep. Now, what happened? What happened is God said, that's not what God did. God appoints Joshua. Joshua is a different model. What do we know about Joshua? It doesn't say he'll lead them, he'll take them in, take them out. It doesn't say anything of that. What does it say? Verse 21. You shall bestow some of your majesty upon him, so all the congregation of Israel will take heed. So they'll listen to him, they'll pay attention. Fine. Verse 21. He, meaning Joshua, the new leader, shall stand before Elazar the Kohen and seek counsel from him through the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. Right? The high priest had the breastplate of the 12 stones with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel inscribed. And the Torah says that you have a question, you would come to the high priest. The high priest's inspiration would come, and you would sort of see the answer on the letters that were on the breastplate. Okay. But in other words, you're getting counsel. The leader gets counsel from the high priest. Okay. By his word they shall go, and by his word they shall come. Similar to what Moshe says. Moshe says, take them in, take them out. But who's by his words? Not Joshua. That's what I checked before. Not Joshua. The words of the priest, Elazar. By his word they shall go, and by his word they shall come. He and all Israel with him, and the entire congregation. This is a verse that you would never find about Moshe. He, meaning Joshua, and all Israel with him and the entire congregation. This is a different model. The leader is not the shepherd leading them. The leader is with the people. He's not removed. He's part of them. He inspires them. He doesn't overwhelm them with the force of his personality and the force of his leadership. So again, question: why does Moshe say verse 17? Because Moshe is saying, I need a leader, but what's a leader? A leader is like me. And what does God do? God says, no, the leader is not like you. In other words, it was good. It was very nice in the beginning. We needed a leader like Moshe when the people were still spiritually immature. But now the leader is not to be the shepherd. The leader is to help the people lead themselves. In other words, he's with the people. He's not leading them. He's much closer to the people. And indeed, the sages say there's a beautiful, the Medrash says that the relationship between Moshe and Joshua, the Medrash says Moshe is like the sun, Joshua is like the moon. Meaning Joshua just reflecting Moshe's life. In other words, all the mitzvot, all the Torah comes from Moshe, and then Joshua is reflecting Moshe's light. But the commentators explain what the Medrash really means to say is that when the sun is shining, you don't see anything else. All you see is the sun. When the moon is shining, so as the light is diminished, but what you also have then, you look up and you can see the stars, because specifically because the light is diminished, there's room for other people to shine. So what we're saying is in Moshe's lifetime, the people were not required to do anything. Moshe spoon-fed them everything they needed, both physically and spiritually. And Moshe thinks that's a wonderful model. And God says, no, that was fine for the beginning when the people were sheep growing up. But now Joshua will be with them. So you have the priest, which is the word of God, and then you have on the other side, you have the leader, Joshua, together with the people and together with the entire congregation. That's a different model. And that's the shift, because now the people are called upon to act much more than in Moshe's lifetime. This is a continuation of what we said earlier. Pinchas is operating in a time when Moshe is no longer present. That's going to be required of Joshua, required of the Jewish people in times of Joshua. The battles they have to engage in. It's a completely different model than Moshe, where Moshe did everything for the people. So that is the second point. I still want to talk about another point, then tie it all together. But in the meantime, Vicky, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, for the insight. It's all kind of coming together, but I was just very disturbed by the Pinchas story, and I just and was wondering if Pinchas, in a way, paved the way for the new model, because in that story on the last parsha, Hashem asked the judges to take care of the conflict, but instead Pinchas stepped up. So maybe that's why in the transition phase, or in the new phase, we should say, what's required of people is to be more spiritual, more aware of the morality, in order to not just be led, but make their own choices.
Right. So let's separate this from the actual story, because the actual story is troubling to people and troubling. I'm not going to say it's not troubling to me, how he's allowed to do this. But let's put that aside. Let's not talk about what he did, but let's talk about the fact of who took initiative. And you're 100% right. But if you do want to get into the details, God tells Moshe to speak to use the courts to punish the idol worshipers. The problem with Zimri, he wasn't technically an idol worshiper. The sin was different. And the response was a response that Moses cannot say. So yes, somebody has to take, I don't want to say take the law into their own hands, because that, again, someone has to take initiative. We're at a crossroads. It's a dramatic event. Somebody has to do something. Moshe is not here to tell you what to do, even though technically he's here, but he is I don't want to say, I don't know what the word is. He's disarmed. He has no ability to communicate right now what has to be done. So Pinchas acts, and God thinks it's a wonderful idea. So let's not get distracted by the troubling story.
Right. I don't want to be distracted by that, but the fact that Pinchas is the representative of the kindness tribe, of the most kind tribe, kind of tells you that that tribe is also matured enough to be in an advisor position.
Right. So you're saying you're getting into the details, saying that you're kind. Sometimes you need strength. You have to step up to what you're more mature. In other words, you have multidimensional. It's not just I'm kind. I know when to employ kindness. I know when to employ strength. So that's beautiful. But again, if you want to look bird's eye view is, if I have to characterize what's Pinchas without getting into the details, which may make Chami down here for another 2 hours. What is Pinchas? Pinchas is the ability to operate when Moshe cannot give you clarity. And that's the new model, because that's what's going to happen when Moshe, we finish the census, Moshe sort of gives back the sheep to God. And then what's next? Moshe says, God, okay, wonderful. Let's find somebody just like me. Why don't you just make a carbon copy? So I heard a rabbi saying this, and he said a very interesting point, that in Deuteronomy, Moshe talks about the prophets, and Moshe says, God will appoint a prophet. And then he says, God says, and then Moshe says that the prophet comes and says not to worship idols, he's a false prophet. But so there's a whole bunch of laws about prophecy. We don't have to follow the sorcerers because we have a prophet. But Moshe says, Navi, a prophet from your midst, from your brothers, and this is the key word, like me, God will appoint for you. Moshe says, like me, because yes, all prophets are like Moshe in the sense that they're a conduit to God's will. Moshe is the greatest prophet, fine, but all prophets are like Moshe. So it seems that in this verse 17, Moshe basically is saying a leader like me. He doesn't use the words like me. He's talking to God. He's more humble. So he gives the job description, but the job description he gives fits Moshe like a glove, does not fit Joshua. And God is clear. God, if you're listening carefully, I'll be honest, I never heard it till this year when I read this. But if you listen carefully, you hear God. It sounds like God is agreeing with Moshe. But once you start listening, no, God's not agreeing with Moshe. God is saying, no, Elazar is the word of God. Elazar communicates, the prophet, the priest communicates the word of God. The job of the leader is to be with the people, to help the people implement the word of God. But not that the leader does everything, not that the leader goes before them and comes out before them and takes them in and takes them out. That's the four expressions. It's like again and again, he's doing everything. And he's like a sheep without a shepherd. People shouldn't be a sheep without a shepherd. The leader's not a shepherd, right? There's no relationship between sheep and the shepherd. It's a different species. But when you talk about the old model is like that. Moshe is a man of God. People are people, and Moshe is doing everything. Here we say, yeah, Joshua is together with all the other people, standing opposite God, but sort of together with the people, different model.
And who is in a better position to advise people in that new role I think it's more required of the people. In other words, more in Moshe's time, Moshe will do everything. So in the beginning, it's that because we don't have the ability, but after a while, if we keep the old model, then that's problematic. That's holding the kids back. It's like, it's like at what point do you stop taking care of your child and having them clean up after their own toys, right? So at some point, the old model, which was required and necessary and helpful and productive and constructive in the beginning, at some point that same model will break down. And if you keep going on the same model, you're actually being counterproductive and holding your people back and not allowing them to grow and reach their potential. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to go to the offerings just because it's the same theme. You're going to excuse me for saying the same thing again and again, right? I'm just saying it in different ways. Okay, next portion is the fifth portion, is the portion of the offerings. What are offerings doing here? The Lord spoke to Moses saying, command the children of Israel and say to them, my offering, my food, for my fire offering, a spirit of sanctification for me. You shall take care to offer me at its appointed time. In other words, God says, I need my bread, I need my breakfast. So make sure to feed me. What should you do? So verse 3 starts talking about the daily offering. And you shall say to them, this is the fire offering which you shall offer to the Lord, 2 unblemished lambs in the first year, in their first year, each day as a continual burnt offering, olat tamid, continual communal offering. And verse 4 describes, 1 lamb you shall offer up in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer up in the afternoon, etc., etc. And then you talk about Shabbat, verse 9, on a Shabbat day, 2 unblemished lambs, 11, and on the beginning of your months, Rosh Chodesh. Then you go to, we continue in the 6th section of the Parsha, which is Passover in verse 16, and then we go to the 7th day of Passover, then Shavuot in verse 26, B'yom HaBikurim on the first day of the first fruits, etc. Then we go to Rosh Hashanah in verse 1, and then we go to Yom Kippur, B'Asher LaChodesh, on the 10th day of the 7th month, it's 7, and then we go to Sukkot in the next reading. You get the picture. So right now we have a whole list of the daily offering, Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, holidays. Wonderful, fine. What has it got to do with this book? What is it doing here? What is it doing in this parsha? Says Rashi, beautiful Rashi. This comes again from the Sifri, from the Medrash. Command the children of Israel. Says Rashi, we're not really talking about the offering, we're talking about the offerings, but it's in the context of the previous portions, which is the passing of Moshe and Moshe asking God to appoint a successor. Command the children of Israel. Says Rashi, what is stated above? Moshe says, let the Lord appoint. In other words, God tells, this is the verse where Moshe tells God, God, please appoint a leader for the people. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, before you command me regarding my children, command my children regarding me. This is analogous to a princess who was about to depart from the world and was instructing her husband about her children. And he replied, before you instruct me about them, instruct them about me, as it is stated in Sifri Pinchas 24. Beautiful, very interesting metaphor. Okay, we have a princess, we have her husband, and we have the children. How does this play out? So the princess is Moses, the husband is God, and the children are the children of Israel. Says Rashi, what's happening here? So imagine a princess who's about to die. So she goes to her husband, and he tells her husband, I'm dying. You better take care of the kids. And what does the husband say? Before you tell me to take care of the kids, to make sure the kids are going to take care of me. That's the metaphor. What to do with this metaphor is another question. That's the metaphor. In other words, Moshe, the princess, comes to God and says, I'm checking out of here. I'm going to die. Please take care of your children, of our children, of my children. So God says okay, I'll take care of your children, but don't forget, don't just tell me to take care of my kids, tell the kids to take care of me. And that's the introduction to section 5, 6, and 7 of that's introduction to section 5, 6, and 7 of the Parsha. Okay, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? What I'm about to say, I have 2 minutes left. So if you want to sign off, you can sign off. What I'm about to say is my own stuff. So you don't have to accept it. What does it mean? God needs the people to feed him breakfast. It's like the husband needs the kids to take care of him. It's a very strange metaphor. But maybe the interpretation is as follows. Maybe the deeper meaning is as follows. Moshe tells God, I'm about to pass away. We have to take care of the people. So let's appoint somebody like me who will take care of the people. That's the job of a leader, to take care of the people. So God says, okay, I'll give you Joshua. We already know that God didn't do exactly what Moshe asked for, but welcome, Seth.
What time is it?
Everybody could see you. Another 2 minutes. But here, what's happening here now is much deeper. When God says, don't tell me to appoint a leader for them, tell them to take care of me. And that's what Moshe does. He introduces the offerings. We have to serve God daily offerings. It's possible that what God is telling Moshe, how do you lead the people? What's the job of the leader? Is the job of the leader to provide what the people need? Yes, on one level, but there's something much more important. The job of the leader is to inspire the people to realize their obligation toward others, their obligation toward their mission, toward their cause, toward serving God. In other words, the job of the leader is not to tell them to go out before them and come in before them and to take care of them. The job of the leader is to remind them that they have a responsibility to God. And this is a different form of leadership. This leadership is actually empowering because it requires the people to serve God. It requires the people to bring God's offerings, which is a metaphor for connecting God in the world, which we discussed last year. So again, if this is correct, then this is all part of the same idea here. The same idea is that we're talking about a transition from Moshe to Joshua, from the model of leadership where there's a sheep doing everything for the shepherd doing everything for the sheep, to the model of leadership is the husband tells the princess, he says, stop telling me what I should do for the kids. It's time for the kids to grow up and understand they have a responsibility to take care of the father. In this case, it's the Father in heaven. So it's take care of God. But take care of God means to fulfill their purpose and fulfill the mission in the world. And that is what God is answering. The best So God is actually listening to Moshe and saying, I'm going to give you a leader, but here's what the leader does. The leader tells the people not to forget about the parents. In other words, not to forget about their responsibility. They're not just receiving from the leader. The leader inspires them to give and to contribute and to achieve the purpose of creation, which is to bring God into the world, which is the sacrifices. So there's more to be said. This is the idea. Take it or leave it. I'm open to rebuttals and questions and comments and jokes, but thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day. And we should meet each other in good health and enjoy the rest of the day.